Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 79. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very special guest down in Kentucky, Logan Locke with a silent E. Logan, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm pumped to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. We were just saying before we hit record that we've kind of been running into each other in the sphere of social media for a while now, and this feels like it's long overdue. And I have to say, the name Logan Locke has to be one of the smoothest names that I've ever come across.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on me now whenever I'm gonna have kids, because you've got to find something that's gonna fit with like a unique-ish last name. So you got to find the right thing. But yeah, I'm glad that I got the Logan end of the Logan Locke, so it flows pretty smooth.
Of course. Do you have siblings?
I have one younger brother. Yeah, Nick. His name's Nick. So not quite as smooth as Logan Locke, not as superhero like, but still pretty good.
Yeah, not as cool, but still pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of options. You think you'll go with the double L or just something unique?
I think it just depends on the gender. So that'll definitely help me weigh out options of names. So we'll have to see.
All right, cool. Well, we'll be waiting. I'm excited to see whenever that happens. Well, we're skipping right ahead because we haven't even talked at all about who you are and what you're about. So I like to give my guests a chance to introduce themselves, and you can start wherever you want. You can be as in depth as you want. But who is Logan Locke?
Yeah, so I'll go a little bit in depth, but make it short-ish as I can, just because we'll have some context throughout the talk. So yeah, my name's Logan, born and raised in Kentucky. I moved to Bowling Green, which is about an hour north of Nashville in 2014 to attend Western Kentucky University, and was a part of the WKU cheerleading team for 4 years. So I got my bachelor's and my master's at WKU. And then shortly after graduating with my bachelor's, when I was done with cheer, I kind of had this feeling of like falling out of a routine and not really knowing what was next for me besides just work. Like I kind of lost a little bit of an identity of myself. And so I think just a mixture of that and then just a bunch of life changes. I developed an eating disorder, which has kind of really shaped me to where I am now, with being as open as I am about my own struggles and trying to help other people. So that is something that I kind of dealt with, after college, and just a bunch of career changes, all kind of within marketing. And it has now kind of led me to where I'm at now with like creative and social media and things like that.
All right. So I have to ask, how did you get into cheer in the first place? And I only ask that because where I grew up, I don't think my high school cheerleading team had a male on it. I don't personally know anybody that I grew up with that became a cheerleader that was a male. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I played baseball my whole life growing up, and then I was really close with my cousin, and she was a girl, and so it was like the end of my junior year of high school. Her and one of her friends were like bugging me to come to a cheer practice, and there was like two other guys on the team, and I was like, no, I don't really think I like it, and they just kind of kept pushing me, and I was like, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. So I went to like two or three practices, and it's I always say this, like cheerleading is one of those things that you don't expect to like, and you don't expect to be good at. And I just happened to like it and was just naturally good. It was just movements that I was naturally good at. And so after like three or four practices, I was like, this could be something that could like really be a lot of fun. I think I could do, like, even like early on, I knew I could probably do it past high school, because there's not a lot of great high school male cheerleaders, especially. And so if it wasn't for my cousin, I don't think I would have ever even discovered cheerleading.
What? So let's settle the debate once and for all. Is cheerleading a sport?
Absolutely. And actually, So kind of a spinoff of cheerleading is called stunt. So it kind of takes away from the tumbling aspect of it. And this past weekend, it was actually ruled, it was passed by the NCAA to be stunt as an official sport. So it's well on its way now, especially.
There you go. I always thought that was a ridiculous question because clearly to me, it's a sport. It requires an insane amount of athleticism and practice and skill. And so I'd be curious to hear what your role is as a male on the cheerleading team and like, what do you have to be aware of? And maybe this leads into some of the eating stuff. Like, what do you have
Mhm.
to look like? How are you supposed to be built? So on and so forth.
Yeah, so it's really I think whenever I was in college and I was in it, like I look at it way different now than what I did then. And so really, whenever I was cheering, you were either you could stunt really well and you couldn't tumble, you could tumble really well and you couldn't stunt, and then there was those guys that were like a hybrid, like they could do both, which is more of what you see now. But in terms of like the way you look, I was a bigger guy whenever I was cheering. I was way bigger than I am now, like totally different body composition. And so really to me, I just kind of looked at it as like for a male, like you want to be clean cut, you want to look presentable, you don't want to have like nasty looking facial hair, things like that. But yeah, for me, like specifically, my role was more of like a leadership role. Like I naturally just love connecting with people and talking with people. So after like a year of being on the team, I kind of knew um, where my role was going to lead to once like some of the older guys left and things like that. And WKU is a Division I school, but it still has like that really small feel. And so we were really connected with our sporting programs and our athletic department. And so we had to lean on them a lot for some of the things that we needed. And so I kind of took that role also, which like really pushed me to the like professional line of like working in sports after college and college athletics. So early on, I kind of fell into that. Like people would just look to me for advice or like what we need to do next, and I was just really observant because I knew that that was gonna kind of be my positioning after year one all the way through year four. But yeah, I'd say that I never really looked at like male cheerleaders having to look a certain way. It was more so like how you carried yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so I don't want to ruin this next question by leading into it without asking the question first. So I'll just ask, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle in your life that you didn't necessarily choose for yourself?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm gonna go to two,
Yeah.
just because one of them was one I had absolutely zero control over, and that was when my mom passed away whenever I was 10 years old. And so that really, I think 10 is such a weird age because you're kind of in between the age of like not knowing fully what happened, but you also like you're really starting to figure out what life is or like what bad things are in life. And so I think I was right at that middle age. So that really impacted me, like being in a single parent household. Because you look like for me, most of my life, all I knew was like me, my brother, my dad, and that was it. And so I think that was hard, just not having just the obvious fact of not having like a mother figure for pretty much all of my life. But then the other thing was the eating disorder, which was actually like at the very end of college, which so I was 21 whenever I developed an eating disorder. And that one, it's like I didn't choose to do it, right? But it was just like a part of me did. There was like a subconscious something somewhere, insecurity, whatever it was that chose for me to do that. And that impacted my life in a crazy amount of ways for 3 years, but I also took a lot away from it.
Yeah. All right. So we've got two things to dive into. Let's start back when you were 10. Now, only as much as you're comfortable, I would be interested to hear about kind of the lead up to that moment where you lost your mom and what went on in your life from that moment on.
Yeah, so like I said, I was 10 years old and I had my younger brother who was only four. So growing up, we were just really involved with sports. My mom was a nurse. My dad kind of did like a lot of blue collar work. That's kind of how he was raised. So it was just a pretty typical like, family. And then once we lost my mom, it seems like everything shifted, even though it really probably didn't, other than like just a different household. But it just seemed like a lot of things like compounded and like life just got harder and harder and harder. So like my dad like worked in blue collar, like he had a bad injury at one point. So then he was like out of work and he was on disability. And this was like after my mom passed. So it's like, dang, we went from having like both of our parents both had jobs, like everything seemed normal. Then it's like you get one parent and then it seems like you're kind of struggling a little bit financially, you're struggling just like day to day because you see everybody else who has both of their parents or has their mom at least. And so I think it was just a lot of adjusting, and obviously like it was really hard to kind of have like a feminine side or like a, I guess, like emotionally like prominent side whenever you grow up in like an all male household.
Mm.
And so I think that was one of the hardest things for me to learn growing up, was like having that side and being vulnerable. But I think for me, jumping ahead, like college really provided that for me. So I'm thankful for that. But I think that was one of the bigger struggles after losing my mom, was like being able to channel that at an earlier on in life than what I would have wanted to.
Yeah. It's really awesome to hear how you took away seemingly positive things from such a seemingly negative experience. And the fact that you're so vulnerable today, I would have never guessed that you even thought that growing up without a mom made it harder for you to be vulnerable because you're good at it, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, do you ever think about what your mom would think about you today and how you're living life?
Absolutely. I mean, and I still go back, and not everything is like rainbows or butterflies, right? Like everybody has a struggle. Like there's still times where I do struggle with the loss of my mom. But again, like I went back, like I said earlier, you're kind of at that weird age where it's like you don't fully digest what happened, but you sort of do. And so I was definitely at the age where, growing up, like a lot of my purpose, a lot of my drive was because of her. So, and that's even to today. And like finding my wife, like I constantly think about like what my mom would say, would she be excited, things like that. Going to college to be a cheerleader, like it's kind of funny to think like, what would she have thought? Because obviously, when I first told my dad, he was kind of like, what? So it's like, what would my mom have said? So things like that. So she's definitely like a driving force behind a lot of my accomplishments. And it's not like an everyday thing, but sometimes you kind of just step back and like reassess where you're at and like reflect. And I definitely have those thoughts.
Mm. Are there lessons you took away from watching your dad raise you and your brother through that?
Yeah, and I think it kind of I think a lot of kids in general, like as they get older, they realize maybe they were a little too hard on their parents. And so I think for me, that was one of the biggest things, was realizing everything he had to do. Because I mean, you're married, you think about like being in that position. Like my dad was young. He was in his 30s whenever he lost his wife, and then he has two boys to raise on his own. So for me, it's like, gee, like this man had to do a lot with a little bit of resources and a little bit of help. So I think for me, it was just like being more present and like being more appreciative of the things that I do have, and maybe try to be like not so reactive to certain situations. And then hopefully whenever I'm a parent, I can kind of try to see where my dad was coming from and not get so upset if my kid reacts to me in a certain way or in a similar way that I did to my dad.
Yeah. I hope your dad gets a chance to listen to the podcast or at least this section of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can relate. I grew up with both parents and both my parents are still around, but I I gave him a hard time. I think that's what kids do. And my dad would always just say, you just wait until you have kids someday
Mm-hmm.
and then they're gonna give it back to you. And so
Yeah, heard that
um,
line plenty of times too.
so all right, to transition a little bit. So you're in college. Before we get to the eating disorder part, could you tell us a little bit about how you met your wife?
Yeah, so my wife and I are both from Kentucky. We grew up like probably our towns were about 2 hours apart where we were born and raised. And then we both attended Western Kentucky University. She was a really good cheerleader out of high school. So she tried out at WKU, made the team. Same year that I tried out and made the team. So at first we were just friends. And then we were obviously teammates. We're together like every single day. And then usually from like the time frame of late November through mid January, we have two-a-days to get ready for college cheerleading nationals in Orlando. And so we're together every day, like you and your entire teammates are together every day for like 4+ hours a day. And so that's whenever our like friendship really started to progress, and we just like our humor was the same. We connected on a bunch of different levels. So we were really good friends before we were ever like in a relationship. And obviously we had the connection and the bond over cheerleading, and we like had the same friend group, so we're always together. And so we got to know each other very fast, like in terms of personalities and like how they reacted when they're like in a team setting and like it gets hard and everybody's like pouring their blood, sweat, and tears and everything. So I think we had a really unique way of like connecting really, really early, and I'm really thankful for that. But yeah, if it wasn't for that's another thing. If it wasn't for cheerleading, I would have probably never met my wife.
So you have your cousin to thank for sure. We got to send
Absolutely.
her this podcast. Let me
Mhm.
ask you this: what's your wife's name?
Emily.
Emily Locke. That's got a
Yeah.
nice ring to it too. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know why. I'll just throw this out there. I think Lily Locke would be a mouthful, but it's kind of cute. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
I got
Um,
that. I'll plug it in here.
so all right, so you're in college, you've met who is going to be your wife. When do you know that she's going to be your wife, or when do you know that you want her to be your wife?
Honestly, it was really early on. And when we met, I was 18, she was 19. So like we were still really, really young. But I honestly would say like less than a year in, I pretty well knew like this, like it would just make no sense for me to be with anybody else. And I think, and we both made that very like clear to one another that we were like, okay, like what's the plan whenever we finish college? Like there was never talk of like, are we going to move here separately? Are you going to go do this? I go do that. Like it was always, we were always talking as if we were going to be together. And I think that was just like a sure sign for me. And it was never like a question, like anytime after probably 7 or 8 months of whether or not we were going to like be together forever.
Yeah, that's awesome. Were you
Yeah.
were you like coordinating the cheers so that you could be on her side of the action and
Unfortunately, I didn't have all control over that. Game days it was a lot different. That's one thing I guess I can add to like this cheer sport question. Like on game days, it's obviously a lot more like laid back, relaxed. Like you do some easy stunts here and there. I could get away with it a lot more then because you're not really doing like anything crazy. But whenever it came to like competing, it was kind of like whatever fit works. Some couples don't do well studying together; they might fight, whatever. But her and I always did really well together. I was definitely a lot more high maintenance than what she was, so we went together pretty well, even as stunt partners.
do you guys ever just go out in the backyard and break out a few stunts?
We have, and she actually helped coach the team a couple of years after we graduated while she got her master's. So we were kind of around it and we're still around it now, more so as like fans and alumni, but we were still kind of in it for a little bit after we graduated. But we've definitely let off the gas pedal a lot now. So
Yeah, that's fair. Well, you'll get to teach your kids someday, which would be cool.
yeah, yeah.
So all right, so you've met her, you know that you guys are going to be together, and then it sounds like you developed your eating disorder after that. So tell us a little bit about how that started.
Yeah, so like I didn't want to give away too much in the beginning of my intro. So like I'd said before though, I was a bigger guy. And I kind of talked about those guys that either were good at stunning and not tumbling. I was the guy that was really good at stunning and I could do a tuck, like a back tuck and like a couple running tumbling passes and that was it. So I was a bigger guy. I was probably, I don't really ever care about like weight, but just for reference, like I'm only 5'7" and I was like 240 pounds at my biggest. And so now I'm around like 170 to 180 typically. And so I was a bigger guy then. And I was getting my degree in sport management, and that's like a really, really broad field. And I knew I needed experience if I wanted to get a job after college. So I took an unpaid internship in Atlanta, Georgia, the summer going into my senior year. So pretty much I don't have a source of income. I'd saved up money for like 6 months knowing I was going to go on this internship. So I just saved up money and went there with full expectations to like not have a life outside of my internship. And so I wasn't even 21, so I couldn't go out even if I wanted to and all that. And so at that point, I was like, well, if I'm going to want to make a change, like physical fitness wise for my health, like I think this is the time to do it because I'm by myself and like I don't have any source of income. So if I'm going to make like do with my time, I might as well put it towards something that is going to be useful and beneficial for me. So bought a gym membership in Atlanta. I was at a long-term Airbnb with like this couple that were from England. Like it was a really like looking back now, I'm like, it's kind of crazy what I just like throw myself into. So yeah, I lived there for 2 months and my routine was wake up, go to my internship, go to the gym after that, come home, cook dinner, call it a night, in bed by like 9 o'clock. And I'm like 20 years old. So my wife came and saw me like a month after I was there. And I remember we met at like a restaurant with her and her mom. And I got out of the car and she was just like staring at me like, who are you? And I was like, what? She was like, look at your clothes. And like my clothes were baggy on me. I'd probably lost in a month. I mean, I probably lost like 15 to 20 pounds in a month. Like it was very, very significant. And being kind of bigger, I think the weight just came off like very quick anyway. And so then, I went back, finished that last month out. I ended up, and when I left from my internship, I was kind of getting into working out anyway. And so I was at about 225 whenever I left. When I came back, I was at like 190. Like I lost a significant amount of weight. And so I think whenever I came back, I went from being, and keep in mind, like I was one of the better male stunners on the team. So I was strong. I could pretty much stun with any girl, no issue. And then I go 2 months and I lose all this weight. I haven't been doing anything cheerleading related. Come back and I'm like my stunts are not even close to what they were. And then along like partnered with, I've had this routine for 2 months of go to work, go to the gym, and I have full control over that. And so I come back, I'm thrown back into school, thrown back into cheer schedule, back at my job. And so I think subconsciously, maybe it was a mix of fear of wanting to put weight back on, but also like losing control, that I wanted to regain some sort of control. And it was an eating disorder. And so it really kind of started with like restricting calories and just like being very, very obsessive with the foods that I was eating. And then almost starting to look at exercise as like a form of counterbalancing like the calories that I'm intaking. And then that progressed and progressed, and it slowly began to like binge eating and then purging, so bulimia. And it just like it was an almost feels like the switch from like being really restrictive with calories to bulimia almost was like overnight. And I still like I have no clue what it was that triggered that made me want to even take it to that extreme. But yeah, I think it was just like I said, I think it was that combination of like losing control of something I had and then the fear of like gaining weight back that kind of just like butted together and formed this like obsessive behavior that was an eating disorder.
So the last episode I recorded, we talked about this exact thing, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on it. Just what goes through your mind when you're okay, so now you're dealing with bulimia, you are still functioning, right? As a cheerleader, as a boyfriend, as a student. How do you go through life like that? What does that look like? What does that feel like? I mean, what are some of the thoughts that go through your mind?
Yeah, and it kind of shifted along the way. And I think in the beginning, whenever I was still in college, a lot of it was just the restrictive calories. And then once I graduated is whenever it really progressed. So while I was in college, it wasn't, I don't think it was hindering as much of my life as it was post college, because I was really just kind of obsessive with calories, but I still kind of knew like, when I'm cheering, like I'm burning a lot of calories and I'm just super active. So I know I need to be eating. I know I need to be intaking fuel. And so I was just really obsessive with it, but I still provided myself enough to like get through the activities that I needed. But it was just, it was always a thought in the back of my head of like, what am I going to eat after this? What am I going to eat before this? Whatever, whatever. So after jumping ahead post college, I'm done with cheer. I have no form of like physical activity besides going to the gym like a little bit, and I'm running like maybe a mile or 2 miles a day, like 4 days a week. And so I knew that I was losing that active lifestyle that I had. And I think, and that's kind of when it made the switch to bulimia. And once COVID, and so that went on, I graduated in 2018, and that the bulimia started probably around the end of 2018, going to 2019. As COVID started, I think everybody kind of, found like a new thing in COVID. And for me, it was like running. And so I started my Instagram where I could kind of post updates on running and things like that. And that's when I soon found like the BPN community and saw everybody chasing goals, like doing all these hard things. And so I started getting really, really invested in the BPN community. And that is whenever I really started to feel like, for lack of better terms, like just like a piece of crap. I'm trying to like preach to all these people, like here's what I'm doing. Here's some things you can do to reach your goals, like this, that, and the other. But then on the other side of that, like I'm struggling myself and nobody knows. Like I'm struggling with an eating disorder, and I'm like trying to be a good. At this point, my wife and I are engaged, so I'm trying to be a good fiance. We're about to get our first dog, and then like I had this full time job, and I'm trying to like help others through Instagram and like on social media. But in reality, like this eating disorder that's behind all of that over here is hindering with all that. And so it's taken away from my athletic ability. It's taking away from my relationship with my fiance because I'm so like worried about food and like my body. And it's taken away from like my ability to perform at work, because even throughout the day, it's just like it feels a lot bigger than what it really is, but your mind just portrays it that way. And so for me, it was just like I felt like I was a phony, because I have this front of like this, energetic guy who like has all these relationships and connections with people and like fitness and health and all this. And people were like praising me for all the running I'm doing and like the way that I look. And that was another big trigger for me at the time, was like, I have to upkeep the way I look because people were complimenting my weight loss and the way I look. And so it finally got to a point where I was like, this is just so exhausting, and it's going to eventually hinder areas outside of just like how people portray me. And it's going to affect my relationships with my my fiance and my family and just like how I function day to day.
Wow. There's a lot of stuff that I'm sure is very relatable for people there. There's this saying that I think most people have heard, you can run, but you can't hide. And I never knew what that meant until I started this podcast and started hearing story after story of people eventually confronting the thing that they were running from. And that's when they were finally able to overcome it. And I think that's a really powerful lesson and takeaway for anybody listening is you can run, but you can't hide. And it sounds like you turned and you faced this. What did that actually look like for you to turn around, to stop running, and to face this?
Yeah, I remember the exact moment. I was, after college, I was working full time in sports and college athletics. But during college, I worked in Kroger Pharmacy as like a pharmacy technician, and I kind of continued that just as an extra form of income. And so I picked up a shift that night after my day job at Kroger Pharmacy. I'm sitting in there, and it was November of 2020. I remember, and I just got this sense of just like I just felt nauseous, just sick to my stomach, and my whole body just felt like week. And I just had this guilt of like, I've got to tell Emily, like, I can't do this anymore. And if I don't tell her right now, I'm not going to do it because, and from the past experience with my eating disorder, there were multiple stints where I was like, okay, I'm done with it. And I would go 2, 3 weeks, but then I get 2, 3 weeks in and I'm like, nobody even knows. Nobody knows besides myself. And so it was just that never ending cycle back into it again. And so I finally got to that point that night where I was like, I've got to tell him, I've got to tell somebody. And I would rather it be somebody that I know is going to hold me accountable and that I'm close enough with that I'm going to feel like I'm not letting myself down, but I'm also letting somebody else down if I fall back in that cycle. So I remember I asked our manager, I'm like, can I go? Like, I'm not feeling very good. Do you care if I go home early? Or I think I maybe told her like I had a family issue. So she was like, yeah, that's fine. So I drive straight home and I'm like already just like sick. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. So I walk into our apartment and as soon as I walk in the door, I'm just like already broken down. And so, her first instinct is probably not he's struggling with an eating disorder. It's probably something with our relationship. So the first thing I said, I'm like, we're fine. We're fine. Like, we're okay. And she's like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I just like told her everything. And I was like, the last 3 years I've been battling this eating disorder and I feel like I can't do it anymore. Like I'm over it. I'm tired of hiding it. I'm tired of fighting with it. I'm tired of like falling back in the cycle. And my wife is very educated in the mental health field. And so she has been like a huge help for me. And especially that night, and I told her from the beginning, like, I don't need you to do anything. I don't need you to like check in every day. I just needed to tell you. I needed that accountability for myself. And I'm very much like, if I set my mind on something, if I tell myself I'm going to do something, if I put it out to somebody, it's going to get done. And so I knew by telling her that, I was like, I'm not going to let myself fall back in that cycle. And so that it like when you said run, don't hide, I was like, that's literally exactly what happened to me because it was just built and built. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't hide anymore. Like I've got to air this out. And so, yeah, I dropped everything, what I was doing in that moment, drove straight home and told her. And I was like, here it is, take it all, digest it, whatever you need to do. But like, I'm done with it. And I just needed to tell somebody. And so that's exactly what happened to me.
It's just I don't know. I think it's as close to a truth as you can get. It's just you can't run from things. I mean, you can run from things, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. You got to face it. And I've had similar experiences with things, and it's interesting to hear you say that you would go 2 or 3 weeks and then realize nobody even knows, so it's okay. I'll rationalize this and I'll jump back in. I've had similar things happen to me in life, and I think everybody can relate to that. And even to the point where you can go 2 or 3 weeks or even months, and then you think, well, like I could stop when I want. So I'll just start again and then I can stop when I want. And then you might stop again for a couple weeks or months, but eventually this thing, it needs to be aired out. And so it needs to be bigger than you almost, right? You need other people to know about this. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think a lot of people feel stuck. They feel like they can't tell other people because they feel like they should be able to bear it entirely by themselves. And that's just not the case. And there's nothing wrong with reaching out for help. And then it sounds like after you told your wife that now you've told the world many times over. And I'm curious what that transition was like from telling just your wife to airing it out on social media for anybody to see?
Yeah. So I've said it before when I've talked about it. The first couple of months were really, really hard for me. And it was hard for me. It was hard for my wife, but we really just tried to, you know, take micro steps to get to that macro goal of like being good, being in recovery. And I'm thankful I never had to do any sort of like facility recovery. I did everything on my own. I had a lot of people I leaned on, and I developed a really good relationship with the staff at the National Eating Disorders Association, which was really great. But yeah, the first, I would say, 3 to 4 months, I really struggled with my relationship with food. And over time, your body like loses sense of, am I hungry? Am I full? And so then you start overanalyzing it, and you get to a point where you don't care what your body says. And so regaining that trust with my body for the first three, real, I mean, and even now it's still a little bit off, probably compared to how other people who haven't experienced an eating disorder are like day to day. But the first 3 to 4 months were really tough, and nobody knew. I didn't tell anybody. And then it was coming up on a year. I was really in a really good place. And I just like, so the three, give some context, 3 to 4 month mark was really hard in terms of like really like breaking the thought of like being obsessive with food and like over analyzing my thoughts with food. And that, once that got better, that's when I really dove back into like my fitness again, and like really, because I love movement, I love physical activity, and I love to run. And that's actually, running became, a really big branch off of this process that we can talk about later. And just like really developing like a healthy relationship with working out and fitness, but two, making sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons. Because, like I said before, I really struggled before with like looking at exercise as like, like a second half of eating a meal or something. Like it was almost like I had to go work out before or after I was going to eat. And so making sure that I was not doing like working out for the wrong reasons. So that was all within a year. And then really, I probably wouldn't have come out public with it as soon as I did if it wasn't for that relationship with the Eating Disorders Association. So I had really kind of dove into running like really heavy. I'd run a couple marathon distances, and I was signed up to do a relay across America with like a really awesome MS organization. So I got connected with the Eating Disorders Association, and I kind of pitched this idea, not really expecting to get a response. I was like, "Hey, I'm a year into recovery. I would love to do some sort of partnership with you all to fundraise." And I threw this idea of like, I want to do, it's called the Calendar Club Challenge, and it's whatever day of the month it is, that's the amount of miles you run. So I wanted to do that for the month of November and fundraise for it, and then donate whatever proceeds to them. Well, they like got on one meeting and they were like, "Yes, we're sold. Like it's done." I was like, "Oh, okay." But then they were really great about telling me, but if you do not want to do this or make it public, like do not. They were super great about not pushing me. They were like, "This is your journey. Don't ever feel like you have to share anything." And so yeah, I took like probably a solid 2 weeks of like telling my family and seeing how I felt about telling them, to like really gauge like, am I comfortable telling people like on a large scale? And I wanted to make sure that my family knew before I put this out to the public. And so I told my family, felt really good about it. And so then I kind of went forward with telling the world. And it's really scary at first, because you, like I said before, you have like this, you feel like you're a phony because you have this front, people know you as one thing, but like you're struggling with this behind closed doors. And to me, it is a really big thing, but of course, you're your own biggest critic. So it felt like the biggest problem that anybody has ever had in the world, and I had it. And so I think getting past that mind, like through that process of thinking and transitioning to that to, I can help other people. Like there's probably so many other people that struggle with this. And I've learned that since coming out to the public. I've probably met close to 100 people that have reached out to me or I've connected with that have struggled with eating, with disordered eating, eating disorders, whether it's as extreme or more than what I dealt with. And so it's so funny to look back now, or interesting to look back now and see how I thought about it then and being so scared and just seeing the progress. So really that first year for me was, I've got to say it's obviously it's not cookie cutter for anybody. Like this is what you do and this is the time frame, but I'm really, really grateful that it played out the way that it did, and the timing that it did. And so after about a year is whenever I put it out to the public, like on a pretty large scale, and then really started to try and tie it in, like every so often to my personal page, just so that people can see, like just a reminder, like here's a part of who I am, and it doesn't define me, but it's something that it was a chapter in my life that has kind of helped me get to where I am and kind of think the way that I think now.
I think that's amazing. And the world needs more of that. And there are a couple things there I'd like to highlight. The one is that your experience with the eating disorder doesn't define you, but it is part of your journey. It's part of your story. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then, two, that feeling of my problem is the biggest problem in the world, I think is so relatable. Because at the end of the day, we're all thinking about ourselves quite a bit. While we're worrying about what other people are thinking about us, they're also thinking about themselves usually. And it's funny to think of it in this way, but to come out and tell the world, right, that you have an eating disorder, that you're struggling with anything, is almost just telling the world that you're not perfect, which really is no surprise because none of us are perfect. And so, in that context, and then when you shift it and reframe it and look at it through the lens of this is going to help other people, it almost becomes a no brainer in hindsight. But in the moment, it is really, really hard to get over that barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the biggest things I struggled with was like, hitting that post button. It's like, how do I am I really ready to do this? And then I kept thinking back to am I not sharing because I'm afraid of what people are gonna say? Like I'm scared of what they might think, or am I not doing it because I truly don't want to? And so I think just having to like assess that because I knew I was ready to like share it and just like connect with people who have been through it so I could also learn from them and they can learn from me. And but really what was holding me back was just like this presence or image I felt like I had casted of myself, and I thought that it was going to completely just like wipe that away, erase it, and nobody was going to care anymore. But it honestly did the total opposite, and I feel like that I can connect with people a lot more. And it's honest, and like you said earlier, like it's made me way more vulnerable with other aspects of my life. And so I think it's been huge for me, but it was
Yeah.
definitely really hard.
Yeah. I hope that's an encouragement to anybody listening who feels like they have something that they're holding on to and afraid to put out into the world. And as I always say, and I'm sure this goes the same for you, Logan, my door's always open. And somebody's listening and they want to send you a message or send me a message and talk about these things, we're here. So, with that being said, Logan, those are two things that were really, really hard for you that you didn't necessarily choose entirely for yourself. What is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why have you chosen to do that thing?
Yeah. I think it for me it's always going to be running. Like I always try to do something, since I got into running, it progressed very quickly from like half marathon distance to full marathon and then to ultra marathons. And if I had to say like one single event that was the hardest was the relay across America with that, with the multiple sclerosis organization. It was a stint of 141 miles over a 5 day time period. So essentially, it was I did a 50K a day for the first 4 days, and then it was a shorter day on the last day. And you're on an RV, you have a crew with you, so that part made it nice because you have support. But the physical and mental aspect of being out there, I did it all pretty much by myself the first year, and then I did it again in 2022 totally by myself. I still have my crew, but like on the road by myself. I think like the combination of physical and mental, that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've run 92 miles in one race, and that was really, really hard too. But I think just the like choosing to wake up every single day for 5 days straight and like go run a 50K was really hard when you're on a highway and you have like semis with headwinds coming at you, and then the natural headwind. That was probably the hardest thing I've chose to done, but it was also really rewarding. Like when you choose to do something really hard, especially physically, the other side of it is always just like incredible. I mean, I know you just did your marathon, and like during it, it's gonna suck so bad. But then like one thing that you always go back to is like, yeah, but think about all the preparation up to this. Like I'm not gonna waste all of everything. I'm not gonna waste everything that I put in to just quit at mile 20 of 26.2. And for me, it's like I'm not gonna quit at day 3 of 5. And so I think just like shifting your way of thinking to like it's very cliche, but like I get to do this, like I'm choosing to do this is really, really important. But that 5 days, 141 miles was tough. That was probably the hardest thing so far.
Was the first time harder or the second time?
First time. First time was really, really hard. And thankfully, the second time I ended up doing the exact same route. It was kind of last minute, but I did the exact same route. So I knew like a little bit of what to expect, and could pace myself a little bit better. And then, I learned a lot about nutrition and hydration between that year gap. So I was able to fuel a lot better.
What were some of the things that go through your head when you're out there for 5 days, more or less by yourself? What's some of maybe the negative that's in your mind, and how do you overcome that? What are some of the positive thoughts that get you through?
Yeah. The negative is definitely your mind can take you to some really, really dark places that you don't even, and you look back after you're done and you're like, well, I never think like that. Like why, but your body is just so taxed that I remember one day I was running on like day 3. It was my first year. And I remember at one point I was like, I hope I break my ankle out here. Like I hope I just break my ankle so I can't go anymore. But it's like you have that moment, and I always tell people when they're doing their ultras for the first time, like ride the lows out because like you're gonna get a high again. But the same thing about the highs, you're gonna have a low, but just like if you can ride out the first couple of lows, you're gonna know what to expect. And so that was my first low I think I'd ever had in ultra running. And so it was really interesting once I got done. I remember thinking in that moment, like, I'm like, I hope I break my ankle. I'm sick of this. I'm never doing this again. And then you get done and it's like the most rewarding feeling. And I look back, I'm like, I would have been so mad at myself if I would have stopped right then. But then, you ride that low out and you have that high. I finished day 3. And at that point, I knew I had one more big day on day 4 and then a shorter day on day 5. And I was like, I'm over halfway through this. Like, how many people can say that they've done this? And I got to travel, out of Kentucky and like go and do this and live in an RV for 5 days. And then, so, you have that high and, the positive out of that was like, I can't believe I'm getting to do this right now. This is such an incredible experience. Like, staying in an RV with 2 strangers I'd never met until I got here, and they're like taking care of me. All I really have to do is run. They're like giving me all my food I need, all my hydration I need, and so it was just a really humbling experience to also look at it as I get to do this because the whole point of doing that was to raise awareness for multiple sclerosis and fundraise, and a lot of that disease affects like your ability to move in the extreme cases, like you're in a wheelchair. And so like trying to dial that back into when it got really dark was like, okay, there are people who would probably love to be able to be out here and just embrace this suck for 5 days. So I'm going to make the most of it and I'm going to be grateful for it.
Yeah. Episode 7 of this podcast with Hannah Huxley is one of my favorites.
Mm.
And she's in a wheelchair after a car accident, and she's got one of the most beautiful perspectives on life that I've ever heard. And one of the things that she told me in that episode was that anybody out there who's struggling with something, you get to do life. Like, you can get up out of your chair right now and walk to the refrigerator and grab a cup of water. That's something that she can't do. And there's a lot to be grateful for. And you should do that to the best of your ability for the people who can't. And it's awesome to hear that you tapped into that a little bit. And then just to backtrack, I during the New York City Marathon, to your point of looking back and wondering like how did like I've never been to that place mentally before, or that's not me. I don't curse, and I probably dropped the F bomb at least 25, maybe 30 times through that race. And there's this one moment where I, under my breath, was cursing, but it was loud enough where I think the little kids on the side of the the road heard me. So I apologize if you guys are listening, but yeah, it brings you to places you've never been before. And I think that's where a lot of the value of doing hard things comes. It brings you to places you've never been before, both physically and mentally, and it expands our limits. And it sounds like you're a better person because of all of the running that you do, of all of the endurance work that you do. Would you say that's accurate?
100%. I mean, I think that finding running is the best thing that's happened to me in terms of like physical movement and things like that. Like even over cheerleading, like it's a totally different part of my life, and it's come for different reasons and it's impacted me differently. But running is just like this, it provides so much like solitude for me spiritually, mentally, physically, and I can just really take it all in when I'm out running. And like really, like one of the best feelings is after you get done with it. Like I've heard someone say it's the opposite of drugs, right? Like
Mm.
during when you have that high, like it feels good but you feel like crap after. But like during running, it sucks so much during it, but like the feeling you have afterwards is so rewarding. Like you're still hurting, but like you feel so good that you were able to push yourself past something that, maybe you didn't want to do or you didn't think that you could do, and you got to do that. And I think for me, it's just, I've progressively, done harder things and gained more confidence. And it just, like you said, it makes me want to like explore those limitations even more and see what else like hard things that I can push myself through. Because with running, you really get that like physical and mental. Like you said, it totally changes the way your mind would process things before, when you're in like a normal state of not hurting, or like you're not 20 miles into a marathon, or you're not 70 miles into a 100-mile race. So it's definitely provided a lot of solitude for me and a lot of life changing things for the better.
Yeah. So what's next for you in the world of endurance sport?
Yeah. So I have a 100-mile race. So I did a last man standing, which is a backyard ultra style race in October. And I won that race, but we stopped at 92 miles because once there's one person, the race is over. And so I was really hoping to crack that 100-mile mark. But, came up 8 miles short. But in the moment, I was glad that it was over and that, I won. So I'm going to crack that distance this year. On April 1st, I'm going to do a rim runner 100-mile race. It's in Swanee, Tennessee. I did that course last year as the 50-mile race, so I'm going to do that as the 100 this year. It's a 25-mile loop, so it's a beautiful course. And the nighttime loops will be easy enough since I'll kind of know what the course is going to look like. So that's what's next for me. And then I'm on the wait list for a big 100-mile race around the May time period. So we'll see if I get into that one. But that's what's next so far.
Awesome. So we'll keep an eye out for that, and I'm excited to hear all about it when it's done. With that being said, I'm curious because you do a lot of endurance work. When you hear the word endurance, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think, and I've translated the word endurance to like so many aspects of my life now, and I think it's just being able to like, and this is such a cliche thing that like that Jeff Cunningham and that Nick Bare and them talk about, is like being consistently good over occasionally great. And I think that is the perfect definition for endurance, is like being consistently good over a period of time and not just showing up once or twice over a 7-day time period. And for me, I've translated that to running is like, showing up every day with my training while still listening to my body and being smart, but like not letting my mind win, my negative thoughts win, and showing up and being consistent and getting all my workouts in. That way, whenever I get to race day, I know that I can conquer that. And then with being a husband, you can look at endurance as like being a good partner and like trying to be conscious of, have I asked my wife, have I given my wife a kiss since I got home from work? Have I asked her how her day was? Or have I only talked about myself? And then we're just being a good human, just like realizing that, like, sometimes I'll be on Instagram and you get so busy with like life, you realize that all these people have been like hyping you up and like DMing you and like commenting on your stuff. And you're like, what have I done for them? And it's not like being fake. I think that's just like being real, like trying to be like conscious of being a good person and like maintaining connections and relationships and showing people that you're not just like in it for show, and just like being able to do that over a long period of time and not get burnt out. And I think that's just part of like, like I said, just being consistent with life in general, and building that discipline. So endurance is very broad for me now. When I first started running and doing ultras, they're like, what's endurance? I'm like, running more than 50 miles, running more than 30 miles, running more than this, but it's a lot more than that to me now.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought up marriage when you talked about endurance, because I think that's probably the best example that I can think of off the top of my head. And it's maybe not the one that most people think of, because I do think most people think of running or endurance sport. But even before recording this podcast, I had a moment where I was in the middle of posting something on social media, about to get it ready and hit the post button. My wife walked in the door and she had a tough day at work. And it was that decision to put the phone down on the table, still in eyesight, just want to hit the send button. But
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about her day, and that's where my focus needs to be. And it's those little things that nobody really gets to see. And I think that's part of what also makes marriage hard, is that you can run 100-mile race or a marathon or do whatever, post about it on social media, everybody's all into it, but those little moments behind closed doors, in our relationships, people don't really get to see that, and there's not a whole lot of external accountability or praise to keep us going. And it's kind of you and that other person, or just you and yourself. And you have to be able to show up that way over and over and over again because you made that commitment. That's why I also think marriage is so beautiful. Um, yeah.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. And it's, we've been married for, you know, it'll be 2 years, June of this year. And so, it is crazy how like as you get older, you start realizing like there's other priorities in your that are in your marriage that weren't prominent like in your relationship. And so like you said, you nailed it. Like it is hard as when you're younger, it's you and you said earlier, like people tend to focus on themselves only for probably 75 to 80% of their day. And so when you have somebody else, like that is a commitment that, you've got to care for them and love them and check in with them. And so I agree, like marriage is so beautiful because when you step back and think about it, like I think it's easy to take it for granted, but like not everybody gets to do that. Not everybody finds their person and gets to like be married and spend their whole life together. So it's something that even right now I'm like, what can I do better when I go home? I'm like, so yeah, I think it's great to hear it every now and then, and that's awesome that you like think that way. And yeah, there is no way to really be judged externally unless it's most of the time it's something bad. So I think it's good to just keep that an intimate connection strong as much as you can, and um, just hold it over time as much as you can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's also nice to be able to talk about it with people like yourself. And one of the reasons why I love podcasting over other forms of social media or content is because you do get to have these conversations and you do get to talk about these things that maybe aren't as easy or common to post about. And it's this back and forth where you really get to learn as the conversation unfolds. And so, what I'd like to do is transition toward the last question. Um, I ask this every single episode, and each answer is different, although similar. Everybody listening to this is in a different place in life. Some people are really hurting. Some people are riding a low. Some people don't know what to do or where to go. And then there are other people listening to this who are, at a peak, on a high, feeling really good, anticipating maybe when the next low might come. And you get to talk to everybody right now. What would you say to the people specifically who are hurting? And what would you say specifically to the people who are on top of the world?
Yeah, I think the people that are hurting, it's really hard to hear in the moment. But I remember a lot of times whenever I was hurting and I was my eating disorder, you follow these people that, and an example was like Nick Bear, like he's talked about his eating disorder, and I was like, well, look at him now. Like there is another side to it, but it's just like I just never feel like it's going to get there. So I would say, like just know that it's a process, and if you need to, set a reminder in your phone 2 weeks from now and compare how you feel then to how you did 2 weeks ago. As long as you're trying to make progress, you're gonna see it. It's just like you wake up, you see yourself in the mirror every day. You live in this same body every day. You're not going to see progress is not going to be linear, like day to day, hour to hour. But if you look back 2 weeks, set a reminder, look back 2 weeks, a month from now, and be like, wow, like I can't believe I was sitting on the couch all day doing this, and I was crying all day, and now like I'm going to meet friends after work. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Maybe you're wanting to lose weight, like you're down 2.5 pounds or whatever your goal was. Like it's got to compound over time. So just stay true to the process and know that although you may not see progress like right now in this moment, if you stick to it, you will months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. And the people that are riding the high right now and that are loving life, be present in every moment of it, because it's really easy to take for granted when you're in that high. You tend to look at that as like everyday life, everyday life, but it's not going to look like that every day. I think like a super silly example of this is if you get a cold, like you take for granted how easy it is to breathe through your nose. And you're like, God, I've never taken for granted how easy it is to breathe again. And then you start feeling good again and you're like, you totally forget about it. So I think just that's one thing that I practice. And, I do therapy. And that's one thing that my biggest takeaway from doing therapy and seeing a therapist is like being present. And like if you're sitting on a couch at night, you're sitting with your significant other, you're sitting with a friend, you're with your dog, your pet, like sit on the couch and like feel the couch cushions and like just practice being present in that moment and just like look around and be like, wow, like I'm super lucky to be here, and I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing and not get complacent because I know that one day something can be taken away from me. So I'm just gonna, just keep striving and keep being present and keep being a good person for as long as I can.
Uh, those are great answers. And I really hope that people listening who those answers resonated with take them to heart. I want to share a quick story about a client of mine because I think it goes with that last point. This person's been through a lot in life, especially as of late. And just recently, they got their own place. And it's a small apartment, pretty much no furniture, a couch, a mattress on the floor, their dog, a couple kitchen utensils. And I was on this call with them, and they were almost happier than any other person I'd talked to or interacted with in the past year. Because it was Joe. Joe, I have my own. Joe, I have a mattress. Joe, I have a couch, and it's mine. It's my couch. Like, I have a fork that I eat my food with. And it just brought me back to this place of like, oh my goodness, it is so special to be able to be present and to be able to have the things around you, whether it's a lot of things, whether it's a little, whether it's anywhere in between. The fact that we get to take this next breath, that we get to sit in the chair we're in or be in the place we're in, like, it's such a blessing. And I think that all comes down to perspective, and we have to choose to see it that way. And I think your answer was a beautiful reminder. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's awesome. I love to hear that too. That's great.
Yeah. So, Logan, I enjoy this conversation, and I would venture to guess that the people listening did as well. If anybody wants to reach out and connect, if anybody wants to follow along with your journey or just learn more about you, where's the best place for people to do that?
Definitely on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So my handle is at Young Locke Fitness. So YOUNGLOCKE Fitness. Easy enough. I'm always on there. Always respond to people. Love meeting new people. So yeah, if you ever need anything, always tell people don't hesitate to reach out. If I can't help you, I can come up with some resources in one way or another.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys reach out to Logan. Logan, thank you so much for this conversation. And we will circle back when you and your wife have a child someday, because I'm very excited to hear the name.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I'm pumped.
Thank you, man. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.